Timothy Goes to School was a fairly well-known cartoon based on a book series for children, centered around the day-to-day lives of the titular Timothy, a young raccoon inhabiting a world of anthropomorphic animals. The show wasn't anything remarkable, and it was very much geared for the younger audiences. With such an innocent show, there was bound to be some kind of urban legend or creepypasta to be found, and I was fortunate enough to catch a glimpse of one such legend. What I witnessed was a story called Timothy's Bad Week, and it was provided by YouTube. Like many things on the internet these days, I assumed that it was fan-made creepypasta or a trolling attempt. Either way, I decided to allow my morbid curiosity to get the better of me, and sat back to watch the horrors some guy on the internet had inserted into one of my favorite childhood shows. I fully expected a YouTube poop-style run crammed with creepy cliches, and sure enough, the video played in black and white with poor image quality that made the characters seem like they were constantly shifting. Someone had edited the eyes so that they were white voids, but I noticed that they left the theme tune and opening sequence otherwise untouched. Following the intro, the video cut to black and the text read, Monday, before opening to an empty street with Timothy dressed for school, waiting at the bus stop. Animation as bad as ever, and all still done in black and white with those edited eyes. I rolled my eyes a bit at this. Seems that everyone who's ever written a Lost episode had to do something freaky with the eyes. Regardless, I watched as the bus pulled over and Timmy got on. All the other characters were on the bus, but they seemed a little different. Yoko the cat seemed a bit angry, and the two Franks, both bulldogs, were fighting each other, and no one seemed to bother despite their brawl being quite physical. Next to the fighting Franks sat Doris the beaver. Always depicted as a bit of a tomboy, she was much larger than usual, to the point of looking morbidly obese, and kept crying as Fritz the badger and Claudia the raccoon taunted her repeatedly from a nearby seat. Timothy went to sit by a window and glanced over at Nora the mouse, who was holding hands with Charles, another mouse, the pair staring out in front of themselves as if trying to block out the rest of the world. Finally, at the very back of the bus sat Lily the fox, having only one shoe and looking rather upset. One of her arms seemed to have had noticeable bruises. The scene suddenly went black and text read, Tuesday. To my surprise, when the text faded, the scene once again showed Timothy waiting for the bus. This time his clothing seemed a little dirty and torn as the bus pulled up and he climbed on board. Yoko the cat seemed even angrier than before. The two Franks were covered in cuts and bruises as they kept looking over at one another on each side of the bus, as if ready to fight again at any moment. Doris was cowering in her seat as Fritz and Claudia took to pelting her with spitballs, no one seeming to notice or even care. Timothy once again sat by a window and glanced over at Nora and Charles. The two mice were now huddled together as if frightened, still staring in front of themselves, ears pinned back. At the very back of the bus was Lily, who was now completely barefoot, and her bruised arm was now visibly scarred, a small cut also visible on her right ear. The scene once again went black, and text read, Wednesday. By this point, I was getting a little bit bored of the repetitive cuts, but yet my curiosity demanded I continue to view, regardless, as the scene once again showed Timothy waiting for the bus. This time, his clothing was very dirty and torn. His fur also began to look unkempt as his bus pulled up and he climbed on board. Yoko was now flexing her claws, quite literally, and scratching at the back of the seat in front of her in anger. The two Franks, who were covered in cuts and bruises, though one of them now supported a cast on their arm, as the other glared at the other with a look of pure hate from the other sibling. Doris was sobbing and begging Fritz and Claudia to leave her alone as they taunted her, tossing donuts at her that they had smuggled onto the bus in a small box. Timothy, as per usual, sat by the window and glanced over at Nora and Charles. Only this time Nora was by herself, looking very unwell as she continually looked at the empty space Charles had been only a day earlier. At the very back of the bus, Lily was still barefoot, her feet now covered in mud and her fur unkempt as her dress was all torn, her scarred arm now laying limp as one of her ears now had a large chunk missing. The scene went black once more and text read Thursday. I have to admit, at this point I was a little unnerved. Whoever had made this YouTube prank sure had a lot of time to waste. Then again, I guess I was no better as I continued to watch. The text faded to reveal Timothy waiting for the bus yet again. This time his clothing was partially falling off of him, and his fur looked as though it was extremely dirty and unkempt. Once again, the bus pulled over and Timothy climbed on in. Yoko was nowhere to be seen. The two Franks were now down to one, who was covered from head to toe in vicious-looking scars and trembling uncontrollably, muttering to himself. Doris was catatonic, as Fritz and Claudia sat quietly, looking away from her as seeming to lower their heads every now and then in a state of great shame. Timothy, like he always did, sat by a window and glanced over at the empty chair Nora had occupied the other day. When he noticed that she was gone, Timothy turned to Fritz and Claudia for the first time, the pair once again lowering their heads as if to avoid his stare. At the very back of the bus, Lily was covered from head to toe, cuts and bruises. Her clothing was shredded and her right ear was now bandaged, and she had taken to rocking back and forth singing, "Kookaburra sits in the old gum tree." This is where things got very strange, even by Creepypasta standards. The Kookaburra Sits at the Old Gum Tree song continued to play over and over again as the scene turned to black and text read, "Friday." The song played on loop as the now familiar sight of Timothy waiting for the bus appeared. However, he was now on crutches and hobbling onto the bus with a look of anger. The bus was completely empty save for Fritz and Claudia, the pair now sitting on either side of the bus and shaking uncontrollably, as Timothy stopped and looked at them before he headed to the usual window. Then everything faded to black as the Kookaburra Sits at the Old Gum Tree song played one final time before the video cut off. After a moment of thought, I turned off my computer and went to do some work in the real world, deciding that while an interesting watch this creepypasta was, it was far from the best. Nevertheless, I saved the link so that I could show a friend who used to watch the show religiously just to fuck with them. It took a couple of days before I managed to get said friend around, and I opened the link to show them the story. To my surprise, the link ended up showing a normal episode of Timothy Goes to School, and my friend had a good laugh at my expense as I desperately tried to convince him that I wasn't crazy. To this day, I have yet to fully understand where the real link went, and a part of me really wonders if I didn't just dream it all up. Whatever the case of the story of Timothy's bad week soon went from a pasta that I hoped to forget about after a cheap joke on a friend into years of long obsessions. Maybe someday somebody will find it again. Until then, happy hunting. And that, my little shadows, was Timothy's Bad Week. A Timothy Goes to School Lost Episode Creepypasta. My final thoughts on the story? You know, this creepypasta was very, very, very good. I'm gonna be honest. A very damn good creepypasta that I found to be probably the most enjoyable thing I have read so far. However, even with that said, I do have one major problem with the story, but I'm going to mention that later. Let's start off with what was positive about the story. For one, I love the very fact of the matter that the story itself, just didn't go into random blood, gore, pretty much crappy cliches like that. And it actually had a relatively freaky kind of, storyline behind it. Specifically with, a whole week going, 5 days specifically, of Timothy going to school each and every day, and, him seeing his friends in different kind of, unnecessary situations. Okay, maybe unnecessary is a wrong word. Different situations. Let's put it that way. Now, what I really liked about the story was that it was very interesting. It actually kind of played around a little bit with, my mind a little bit when I was reading this, and it made me kind of wonder what exactly happened to these kids. Why exactly are they kind of dying off one by one? Why are they all bruised up and beaten? Why do they hate each other so much? It just kind of made me really think a lot. Which leads me to the negative sides of the story. While I certainly can say that this was a very enjoyable read, the whole continuous mentioning of this being a creepypasta really just kind of had me shaking my head. I mean, I'm not trying to sound rude or anything or disrespectful, but come on, there could have been something else more added to this. It didn't need to have all of that. Unfortunately, it just seemed as though that was pretty much the case with this story. And it's unfortunate, because, continuously mentioning that it's a creepypasta and things like that completely destroys any concept of believability that the story honestly should have. It should have, but unfortunately it doesn't, because, The whole thing just continuously mentioning it over and over and over again. And if that part had been completely cut out, then the story itself would have been perfect. Another issue I genuinely had with the story was the lack of detailed explanation with, why everybody was the way that they were. It just seemed as though the episode itself just kind of showed everybody in each and every day, but it never kind of went into a more detailed reasoning behind why exactly this was the case. I mean, were they all being abused by their parents? Was there like some kind of disease going on? I mean, what exactly happened? Although the disease one is kind of definitely unlikely because, everybody's either bandaged up, including Timothy himself at the end of the thing. And I really do wish that there was a lot more added to it. That way there could have been a better detailed explanation. With this one, it just seemed as though it's just kind of more or less, left to just make everybody think or wonder for a moment. Which I have no problem with certain stories, but in this one, I just don't think it really sat too well. But of course, like I always say, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you disagree with it, that's perfectly fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regard to the creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of the story would have to be an 8 out of 10. It's a very good creepypasta, very well detailed, and very interesting. However, with the constant mentioning of the creepypasta segment and things like that, rather unnecessarily, and the lack of honest detail kind of explaining why all this was going on, it just kind of more or less kind of fell down a bit. It's still a good story. I still recommend all of you go and read it if you find it. But even with that being said, the story itself could have really used a lot more of a... How do I put this? Could have definitely used a lot more details to it. But what did you guys think about this creepypasta? Did you guys enjoy it? Did you guys not? Also, what would you have personally done to help make the story a lot better? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'm the Shadow Reader, thanks again for watching today's episode, and like always, roll the outro, because I'm out.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to thee, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping horror-driven nightmarish gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.